The spaceship silently touched down in the shadow of the massive Earth hospital. Inside, Nurse Talia, a Zrixian alien with mint green skin and violet eyes, stared through the shuttle window in disbelief. She was far from home and even farther from understanding why she, an alien nurse from the intergalactic fleet, was sent to assist human healthcare staff. Talia adjusted her translator module nervously. Her mission was clear: observe human medical practices and assist where necessary. Simple, she thought, or so it seemed, until her first day on the job. The doors slid open, and the scent of antiseptic flooded her senses. She stepped inside, only to be greeted by a chaotic symphony of machines beeping, stretchers rolling, and voices shouting instructions. Talia wasn't prepared for the sheer humanness of it all. So raw, so emotional. A human doctor named Dr. Lee glanced at her briefly and mumbled, "Alien nurse, huh? Let's see how you hold up." Before Talia could respond, a nurse nudged her roughly with an elbow and whispered, "Better get used to long shifts, Drix. And we all share beds when it's too crazy around here. So, hope you're ready for that." Talia's head tilted, her antennae twitching in confusion. Why would anyone share beds at work? She wondered aloud, earning chuckles from passing nurses. Talia blinked, trying to make sense of the odd custom. Zrixians were known for their efficiency and rigid protocols, but sharing beds at work? It seemed bizarre. She mentally filed the comment away, hoping it was a strange Earth idiom she hadn't encountered in her studies. She followed Dr. Lee down the bustling hallway, her footsteps barely audible against the hum of activity. The hospital was a sensory overload, so different from the sterile quiet of Zrixian med centers. Here, emotions ran high, filling the air with tension, relief, joy, and grief. "Listen," Dr. Lee said without slowing his pace. "We're swamped. You help where you can. These, vitals, basic assessments. Don't overthink it. Just jump in. We don't have time to babysit." Talia nodded earnestly, clutching the strap of her medkit. "Understood. I will adapt to your methods," she replied, her voice steady despite the flicker of nerves. The first patient she attended was a young boy with a broken arm, wailing as his mother tried to console him. Talia crouched beside him, her violet eyes softening as she placed a scanner over the fracture. "You are in safe hands," she said gently, hoping her calming tone would transcend the language barrier. The boy sniffled but relaxed slightly under her soothing gaze. She pressed a button, and the scanner hummed to life, projecting an image of the fracture onto the nearby display. The human nurse observing her let out a low whistle. "Pretty handy tech," the nurse muttered. "Where were you when I was stuck resetting bones the old-fashioned way?" Talia smiled faintly, sensing approval in the nurse's tone. Progress. But not everyone was as welcoming. Later, she found herself in the break room, trying to understand Earth's strange obsession with caffeine. Humans bustled in and out, gulping down steaming cups of coffee as if their lives depended on it. She sipped cautiously, wrinkling her nose at the bitter taste, just as a group of nurses shuffled in, their laughter filling the room. "She's a real novelty, huh?" one of them whispered, unaware that Talia's translator had already deciphered the words. "Bet she doesn't even need to sleep. Maybe she's got some weird alien bed-sharing custom or something." Talia set her cup down slowly, her antennae twitching with discomfort. She understood now. The bed-sharing remark wasn't literal. It was a joke, one that she didn't quite know how to respond to. The snickers that followed reminded her she was different. Too different. Her mind drifted back to her home planet, where medical service was revered and nurses were treated with respect. Here, on Earth, she was a curiosity, an outsider in a sea of white lab coats and stethoscopes. And the worst part, they didn't trust her. She was jolted from her thoughts when an alarm blared overhead. "Code blue. ICU. Room 314, echoed through the intercom. Without hesitation, Talia sprang to her feet and rushed down the hallway, her long limbs propelling her with swift precision. She reached room 314 just as Dr. Lee and two other nurses arrived, their faces set with grim determination. A patient lay unconscious on the bed, monitors flashing ominously. Dr. Lee barked instructions. "Get the crash cart. Start compressions." Talia stepped forward instinctively, placing her hands over the patient's chest. "I will handle compressions," she declared. The other nurses hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. "You sure she knows what she's doing?" one of them whispered to Dr. Lee. He gave a quick shrug. "We're out of time. Let her try." Talia ignored the doubt swirling around her and focused on the task at hand. She pressed down on the man's chest with rhythmic precision, her Zrixian strength allowing her to maintain the perfect balance of force. Sweat beaded on her brow, but she didn't falter. After what felt like an eternity, the monitor emitted a steady beep. The patient gasped, his chest rising sharply as life surged back into him. Relief washed over the room. Dr. Lee gave Talia a curt nod, the closest thing to praise she'd received all day. "Good work." The nurses exchanged glances, a flicker of respect beginning to replace their earlier skepticism. Talia wiped her hands on her uniform, her heart still pounding from the adrenaline rush. But inside, something shifted. For the first time since she arrived, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find her place here. Talia lingered in the break room after her first code blue, clutching her empty coffee cup. She could feel the subtle shift in how the staff looked at her now. Not full acceptance, but something close. It was a crack in the wall that had separated her from these humans since she arrived. Yet, she knew one victory wasn't enough. Earning trust here would be a marathon, not a sprint. As the evening stretched on, Talia noticed how the hospital shifted during the night. The bustling energy of the day gave way to a strange quiet, punctuated only by the hum of machines and the occasional distant cough. But it was also during these hours that people let their guard down. Dr. Lee sat slumped in a chair near the nurse's station, exhaustion etched into his features. A nurse handed him a blanket without a word. Talia watched in quiet amazement as two other nurses rolled out makeshift beds using spare gurneys and collapsed onto them, fully clothed, their shoes still on. Her Antony twitched in confusion as the earlier comment about bed sharing resurfaced in her mind. It wasn't a joke. This was real. "Why do they sleep here instead of going home?" she asked the charge nurse, an older woman with tired eyes named Karen. Karen chuckled without looking up from her clipboard. "Because it's faster. If you try to commute home, sleep for a few hours, and come back for the next shift, it's worse than just crashing here for a bit." She gave Talia a quick glance. "Don't they do that on your planet?" Talia shook her head. "On Drix, healthcare shifts are meticulously managed to allow for proper rest. Fatigue is seen as a risk factor, not a badge of honor." Karen snorted. "Well, welcome to Earth. Here, exhaustion just means you care." Talia considered this strange logic, trying to make sense of a culture that seemed to thrive on burning out. Before she could ask more, a commotion erupted down the hallway. "Hey, can I get some help here?" The voice called out urgently. Talia and Karen rushed toward the sound. They found a nurse struggling to restrain a delirious patient. Middle-aged man thrashing wildly in his bed. He pulled out his IV and is trying to get out of bed, the nurse exclaimed, dodging a swinging arm. Without hesitation, Talia stepped forward. Her movements were quick and precise, honed by her training. She gently but firmly pinned the man's arms to his sides, using just enough pressure to keep him from hurting himself. Her alien strength gave her an advantage in situations like this, but she was careful to control it. "Shh, you are safe," she whispered, her voice soft and soothing. "Please, lie still. You are not well." The man's struggles slowed as her calm presence enveloped him. His breathing became less erratic, and soon he slumped back onto the bed, exhausted. "Wow," the nurse muttered, wide-eyed. You've got a magic touch or something. Karen folded her arms, watching Talia with a curious expression. You're different, all right, she said quietly. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Talia gave a small nod, grateful for the tentative acceptance in Karen's tone. But before she could say anything, Karen added, word of advice, though, don't get too good at handling patients. They'll expect you to handle all the tough ones. Talia tilted her head, unsure if Karen was joking. Hours passed, and the night wore on. Talia found herself alone in the pediatric ward, checking on a young girl with pneumonia. The child stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand clutching the corner of a stuffed animal. As Talia adjusted the girl's IV, she heard a soft voice from the doorway. You don't have to do this, you know, Dr. Lee said, leaning against the frame. His voice was low, almost apologetic. Talia looked up, puzzled. Do what? Go above and beyond. You're not here to save everyone. Just do your job. And don't get too attached. It's easier that way. Talia stared at him, her violet eyes searching his face. Why would I come all this way only to do the bare minimum? She asked softly. Dr. Lee sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Look, you'll learn soon enough. If you care too much, this place will eat you alive. Talia didn't respond immediately. She glanced down at the sleeping child, her expression thoughtful. On Trix, we believe that caring deeply is what makes us strong, she said finally. It gives meaning to the work. Dr. Lee gave a tired chuckle. Yeah, well, humans don't have that luxury. He straightened and gave her a faint smile. But I'll give you this. You've got heart. Don't let this place take that from you. Talia watched him walk away, her mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. She had come to Earth with the hope of making a difference. But now, she wondered how much of herself she would have to sacrifice in the process. The night dragged on, and by the time her shift ended, Talia was exhausted. She found a quiet corner in the break room and sank into a chair, her body heavy with fatigue. As she closed her eyes, Karen's earlier words echoed in her mind. Here, exhaustion just means you care. Talia wasn't sure she agreed with that logic. But one thing was certain. Whether these humans accepted her or not, she wasn't going to let exhaustion or doubt stop her from trying. She pulled a spare blanket over her shoulders, curled up in the chair, and drifted into a light sleep, her antennae twitching at every sound, her mind already preparing for the next shift. Talia's next shift started before dawn. The hospital bathed in the dim glow of early morning. Sleep had eluded her, interrupted by distant alarms and her restless thoughts. She stretched out her limbs, shook off the weariness, and resumed her duties, determined to make a difference, even if it felt like the odds were stacked against her. The pediatric ward was unusually quiet, and as Talia made her rounds, she found herself drawn to a room she hadn't visited before. Inside, a teenager lay in bed, his face pale and drawn. His wheelchair sat folded near the wall, its scuffed wheels a silent testimony to years of wear and tear. The boy's name was Ethan, and his file indicated a chronic illness that had left him partially paralyzed. He turned his head as Talia entered, his dark eyes wary. You're that alien nurse everyone keeps talking about, he said, his voice sharp with teenage defiance. Talia gave him a small smile. I am Nurse Talia, from the Zrixian fleet. Am here to help. Ethan huffed, folding his arms across his chest. Yeah, you gonna help me walk again? His words were laced with bitterness, but Talia sensed the pain beneath them. She moved closer, her expression soft. I cannot promise miracles, Ethan, but I can promise you will not face this alone. For a moment, Ethan stared at her, as if trying to gauge whether she was being sincere. Then, to her surprise, he gave a small, grudging nod. Fine. But I'm not calling you Nurse Talia. You're just Talia. Deal? Talia's antennae twitched with amusement. Deal. The hours passed slowly, and as Talia checked Ethan's vitals, she noticed how the tension in his shoulders eased bit by bit. They talked about everything and nothing. His love for Earth's old video games, Talia's fascination with Earth literature, and the strange customs they found equally baffling. "Wait," Ethan said with a laugh. "You mean on your planet? Doctors actually sleep during their shifts. That's wild." Talia smiled. "Yes. On Drake's, rest is essential. Fatigue leads to mistakes, and mistakes can cost lives." Ethan's laughter faded, and he stared at the ceiling, his hands fidgeting with the edge of his blanket. "I wish humans thought that way," he muttered. "Maybe then I wouldn't have to spend half my life in places like this." Talia's heart ached at the sadness in his voice. She placed a hand gently on his arm, offering what little comfort she could. "It is unfair," she said softly, "but you are not alone anymore." Ethan gave her a small, lopsided smile. "You know, you're not as weird as I thought you'd be. For an alien. And you are not as difficult as I expected," Talia replied with a playful glint in her violet eyes. Their budding friendship did not go unnoticed. As the days went by, Ethan became Talia's most frequent patient, always ready with a sarcastic quip or a mischievous grin. The hospital staff began to notice the change in him. How he smiled more, laughed louder, and seemed to have found a spark of joy he hadn't had in years. Karen, the charge nurse, watched the interaction with a knowing smile. "You've got a gift, Talia," she said one afternoon as they passed each other in the hallway. "That boy hasn't smiled like that in a long time." Talia tilted her head. "I only did what anyone would." Karen chuckled. "No, you did what a good nurse does. You gave him hope." The compliment warmed Talia's heart, but it also left her uneasy. The more time she spent with Ethan, the more she realized how deeply invested she was becoming. She could hear Dr. Lee's words echoing in her mind. Don't get too attached. But how could she not? Ethan was more than just a patient. He was her friend. Late one evening, Talia found Ethan sitting in his wheelchair by the window, staring out at the city lights. The hospital room was dark, the only illumination coming from the neon signs flickering outside. "You ever wish you could just disappear?" Ethan asked quietly, not looking at her. Talia sat down beside him, her antennae drooping slightly. "On Drake's, we do not have such thoughts, but I understand. Life can feel heavy sometimes." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "It's just, sometimes it feels like everyone's moving on without me. Like I'm stuck in this place, and no one cares." Talia's heart clenched. She knew that feeling all too well. "I care," she said softly. "And I will stay by your side, for as long as you need me." Ethan glanced at her, a flicker of emotion in his eyes, something between gratitude and disbelief. "You're too good for this place, you know that," he whispered. Talia gave him a small, sad smile. "Perhaps, but this is where I am needed." The bond between Talia and Ethan grew stronger with each passing day. They became inseparable, finding solace in each other's company. And though the other staff members still whispered behind Talia's back, she no longer cared. For the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt like she belonged. But deep down, Talia knew that every moment of joy was borrowed time. Earth was not her home, and sooner or later, she would have to leave. She just wasn't ready to say goodbye. Not yet. The tension in the hospital grew thicker as the days passed. Particularly aggressive flu outbreak had filled every available bed, stretching the staff to their limits. Dr. Lee worked around the clock. Karen looked like she hadn't slept in days, and the usual break room chatter had been replaced with exhaustion-filled silence. Talia moved through it all, focused and steady. The other staff members still gave her curious glances, but she noticed something new in their eyes: respect. When an elderly patient needed calming, they called her. When a nurse was overwhelmed, Talia was the one they sought out. Slowly but surely, she was becoming an essential part of the team. But then came the night that would put everything to the test. It started with a phone call. Ethan's condition had taken a turn for the worse. his oxygen levels dropping dangerously low. Talia sprinted to his room, her heart pounding in her chest. She found him slumped in his wheelchair, gasping for breath, his thin frame racked with coughs. "Ethan." She knelt beside him, steadying his frail body. "I'm here. Won't leave you." The oxygen monitor beeped frantically as his levels continued to fall. Talia quickly checked the equipment, her mind racing. "His tank is nearly empty," she muttered, frustration bubbling inside her. Karen appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "We've got no backup tanks. Supply shortage. They're saying it'll be hours before we get more." Talia's Antony twitched in disbelief. "Hours? He won't make it that long." Karen's expression was grim. "There's nothing more we can do but keep him comfortable." Talia clenched her jaw. She had come to Earth to save lives, not stand by helplessly. The protocols she had memorized were useless now. This was a crisis, and the humans were giving up too soon. Not on her watch. Without another word, Talia sprang into action. "I need someone to cover for me," she said, her voice firm. "I will return shortly." Karen blinked. "Where are you?" But Talia was already gone, sprinting toward the elevator. She ignored the startled looks from staff members as she raced through the hospital. Desperation burned in her chest. She wouldn't lose Ethan. Not like this. Moments later, she emerged from the hospital and headed for the shuttle bay, her mind focused on a risky plan. Her personal medical kit on the Zrixian shuttle contained emergency equipment far more advanced than anything Earth had. If she could retrieve it in time, she could stabilize Ethan until the oxygen supply was replenished. The shuttle doors hissed open, and Talia rifled through the storage compartments until her hands found what she needed. A compact oxygen generator, no larger than a briefcase. It was designed for emergencies in deep space, capable of producing hours of pure oxygen on demand. With the device tucked under her arm, Talia sprinted back toward the hospital, adrenaline pushing her forward. By the time she reached Ethan's room, his condition had worsened. His lips were pale, and each breath sounded like a struggle. "I've got you," Talia whispered, kneeling beside him. She placed the generator on the floor and activated it with a soft click. The device hummed, and a stream of cool, oxygen-rich air flowed through the tube she connected to Ethan's mask. Almost immediately, his breathing steadied. His chest rose and fell in smoother rhythms, and the monitor's frantic beeping slowed to a reassuring pulse. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, weak but aware. He gave her a faint, grateful smile. "Talia, you're crazy," he whispered hoarsely. Talia smiled back, her heart swelling with relief. "Yes, but you are still with us." Karen and Dr. Lee burst into the room, their eyes wide with shock. "What the? Where did you get that?" Dr. Lee demanded, pointing at the unfamiliar generator. "It's Zrixian technology," Talia answered calmly, adjusting the mask on Ethan's face. "It will sustain him until your supply arrives." Dr. Lee stared at the device, his expression a mix of disbelief and grudging admiration. "You broke protocol." Talia met his gaze without flinching. "I followed my duty. Saved a life." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, to Talia's surprise, Dr. Lee let out a tired laugh. "Well, you've got guts. I'll give you that." Karen crossed her arms, her stern expression softening. "And we'd be down a patient if she hadn't acted. You did good, Talia." As the crisis settled, Talia felt the weight of what she had done. She had crossed a line, used alien technology without authorization. But looking at Ethan, who now slept peacefully with color returning to his cheeks, she knew she had made the right call. After the others left, Ethan stirred again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You really are too good for this place, you know." Talia chuckled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Perhaps, but I am exactly where I need to be." She stayed by his side until his breathing was steady and the tension in his small frame had eased. And for the first time since arriving on Earth, Talia felt at peace, not because she had won the approval of her colleagues, but because she had done what was right. Though Ethan's condition improved, the tension within the hospital remained thick in the days that followed. Word of Talia's bold actions spread quickly, dividing the staff. Some praised her for saving Ethan's life, while others grumbled about protocols being ignored. Dr. Lee, though amused by her defiance, warned her not to make a habit of it. "You've got the skills," he said, crossing his arms in front of her at the nurse's station. "But this place runs on rules, not just good intentions." Talia kept her expression neutral, though the words stung more than she expected. She had done what was necessary, yet here she was, caught between gratitude and suspicion. Karen leaned over the counter with a smirk. "Don't let them get to you, Talia. Earth isn't big on rule breakers, but trust me, deep down, they know you're one of the best we've got." Talia gave a small nod, but couldn't shake the lingering unease. She had crossed a line once. What if next time she was forced to go even further? A few days later, Talia found Ethan sitting upright in his wheelchair, his energy returning little by little. "You know, you've caused quite a stir," Ethan said with a grin, wheeling himself closer to the window. "The staff either loves you or thinks you're a total liability. Honestly, it's kind of fun to watch." Talia tilted her head, Antony twitching thoughtfully. Human society seemed deeply divided by small actions. Ethan chuckled. "That's an understatement." But Talia's mind was elsewhere. She had been replaying Dr. Lee's warning over and over in her head. Was she truly helping, or was she becoming a burden to the very people she sought to assist? "Hey," Ethan's voice cut through her thoughts. "You're not having second thoughts, are you?" Talia hesitated before answering. "I do not belong here," she admitted quietly. "Am different. It is challenging to know if I am truly helping or merely complicating matters." Ethan gave her a look of mock disbelief. "Complicating? Talia, you saved my life. That's not complicating things. That's being a hero." Talia's heart warmed at his words, but doubt still lingered like a shadow in her mind. Heroes are often unwelcome in unfamiliar places. Ethan's grin faltered, replaced by a rare moment of seriousness. "Maybe, but you're not just some outsider to me, Talia. You're my friend." Those words, simple and sincere, eased the knot in Talia's chest. She squeezed Ethan's hand gently. "And you are mine." Later that night, Talia stood by the observation deck on the top floor of the hospital, gazing out at the sprawling city below. The stars, so distant from her home, glimmered faintly beyond the bright haze of Earth's lights. She felt the familiar ache of homesickness settle in her chest. She missed the tranquility of her planet, the quiet respect of her people, and the certainty that her work made a difference. Here, every step forward felt like a battle. Footsteps approached, and Talia turned to see Dr. Lee leaning on the railing beside her. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" he asked, his tone softer than usual. Talia shook her head. "Your world is noisy, even when it is quiet." Dr. Lee gave a tired chuckle. "You're not wrong about that." They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the hospital distant, but ever present. "You know," Dr. Lee said finally, "I wasn't sure about you when you first showed up. Thought you'd be more trouble than you were worth." Talia's Antony twitched in amusement. "A fair assumption, given my recent actions." He smiled, but there was something serious in his gaze. "Look, I get it. You came here wanting to make a difference. That's rare. But this place, it changes people. It wears them down, makes them think twice about things they used to believe in." Talia considered his words carefully. "And you? Have you changed?" Dr. Lee sighed. "Yeah, a lot. Some days, I think this job takes more than it gives." He glanced at her, "But seeing someone like you, still fighting to do the right thing, it reminds me why I stayed." The sincerity in his voice caught Talia off guard. She had expected more warnings, more rules. Instead, She found understanding, a connection she hadn't thought possible with someone from this strange, chaotic world. "Thank you," Talia said softly. Dr. Lee nodded, then turned toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's gonna be just as crazy." As he left, Talia stood alone beneath the stars, her doubts fading into the night. For the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt something more than just determination. She felt hope. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe she never would. But as long as there were people like Ethan, and moments like this, she knew she was exactly where she needed to be. The storm hit 2 nights later, both literally and figuratively. A violent thunderstorm rolled over the city, plunging parts of the hospital into darkness. Backup generators kicked in, but not without glitches. Alarms blared as machines struggled to reboot. Patients and staff alike were thrown into chaos. In the middle of it all, Talia found herself in the emergency ward, assisting with the sudden influx of patients injured during the storm, car accidents, falls, and even a few cases of hypothermia. Everyone was stretched thin, their exhaustion palpable. Dr. Lee rushed past her, shouting over the commotion, "ICU systems are down. We need to manually monitor vitals." Talia nodded, grabbing a stethoscope and racing toward the ICU. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows along the hallway, and the air felt heavy with tension. When she reached Ethan's room, she found him sitting upright, wide-eyed with panic as the ventilator beside him sputtered. "Talia," Ethan gasped, struggling to breathe. "It's not working." Without hesitation, Talia sprang into action. "Stay calm, Ethan. I will help you." She disconnected the failing ventilator and pulled out the compact Zrixian oxygen generator from under his bed. She had kept it there, just in case. As the machine hissed to life, Ethan took a deep, shaky breath. Relief washed over him, but his eyes remained fixed on Talia. "You always come through," he whispered. Talia smiled, her heart itching with both affection and fear. But as she adjusted his oxygen mask, the door burst open, and Karen stumbled inside, drenched from the rain. "We've got a problem," she said breathlessly. "The main generator is failing. We need all hands on deck to evacuate critical patients." Talia's mind raced. Moving Ethan in his current condition would be risky, but leaving him alone without backup power was even worse. "You have to go," Ethan rasped, reading the hesitation in her expression. "Help the others. I'll be fine." Talia knelt beside him, gripping his hand. "I will return for you. I promise." Ethan gave her a faint smile, his eyes filled with trust. "I know you will." The evacuation was chaos. Nurses shouted instructions over the din of alarms, while doctors carried patients on stretchers through dimly lit hallways. Outside, ambulances struggled to navigate the flooded streets. Talia worked tirelessly, lifting patients with ease and guiding panicked staff through the darkened corridors. Her Zrixian strength and calm demeanor were invaluable, but with each passing minute, the weight of responsibility grew heavier. Finally, with most of the critical patients evacuated, Talia turned back toward the ICU. But just as she reached Ethan's room, a deafening crack echoed through the building. Power line outside had snapped, sending a surge through the hospital systems. Sparks flew, and the emergency lights flickered ominously. Talia's heart raced as she burst into Ethan's room. His oxygen generator lay silent, the surge having short-circuited its delicate circuits. Ethan's breaths were shallow, his eyes fluttering as he fought to stay conscious. "No!" Talia cried, rushing to his side. She tried restarting the generator, but it was no use. The machine was dead. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced it down. She had one last option. Ignoring every protocol she had ever learned, Talia leaned in close and removed Ethan's mask. "Trust me," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Before Ethan could respond, Talia pressed her lips to his, exhaling a steady stream of oxygen. directly into his lungs. It was a risky, ancient technique, one she had never imagined using, but in that moment, it was all she had. Ethan's chest rose as he inhaled the life-giving breath, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Minutes later, Karen and Dr. Lee arrived, wide-eyed at the scene before them. "What the?" Karen began, but Dr. Lee held up a hand, silencing her. Talia continued the improvised resuscitation until the paramedics arrived with a portable oxygen tank. Only then did she step back, her limbs trembling with exhaustion. Ethan coughed weakly, but his eyes were bright with gratitude. "Talia, you're insane," he whispered, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Talia smiled back, her heart soaring with relief. "Perhaps, but you are alive." The storm passed, leaving behind a hospital battered but standing. Repairs began immediately, and the staff, though weary, worked together to restore order. Talia sat by Ethan's bedside, watching him sleep. His breathing was steady now, the worst behind them. She knew she had pushed every boundary, broken every rule, but looking at Ethan, she had no regrets. Dr. Lee entered the room, his usual stern expression softened. "You saved him," he said quietly. Talia nodded. "I did what I had to." He gave her a long, thoughtful look. "You're not like anyone I've ever met, Talia. And I'm starting to think that's exactly what we needed." Karen appeared in the doorway, a rare smile on her face. "Looks like you're stuck with us, Drix," she said with a wink. Talia's antennae twitched with amusement. "I could think of worse fates." The days that followed were filled with quiet victories. The hospital repaired its systems, and the staff, though still adjusting to Talia's presence, began to embrace her as one of their own. Ethan's recovery was slow but steady, and each day he and Talia shared moments of laughter and friendship that made the challenges worthwhile. "You're not going back to your planet, are you?" Ethan asked one day, his voice hesitant. Talia smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Not yet," she said softly. "There is still much work to be done here." Ethan grinned. "Good. Earth needs you, Talia." And for the first time, Talia truly believed it. As the sun set over the city, Talia stood on the hospital's rooftop, watching the stars emerge. She still missed her home, but Earth had given her something she hadn't expected: purpose, friendship, and a place where she could make a difference. No matter what challenges lay ahead, Talia knew she was exactly where she needed to be. And for now, that was enough.